So we are continuing to look into the issue that I started a couple weeks ago on Christians and alcohol, Christians and drinking, approaching it from the argument that is often made by those who want to justify being able to drink, or those who just have questions about it, saying, well, Jesus drank wine, so can't we? The apostles drank wine, the people in the New Testament drank wine, godly people in the Old Testament drank wine, so why wouldn't we be able to? And so we've been approaching that issue from a series of questions that we're asking and providing answers to them. The first one is simply, is drinking wine today the same as it was in Bible times? And more specifically even, was the wine in Bible times the same as wine today? And I was thinking about that this morning, and the reason for so much of the confusion is because any language, given sufficient time, words in that language change sometimes. Some words will change their meaning over time. And there's been a number of words, English words, that have different meanings today than the time when they were translated in the King James Bible. And I just went looking for a couple examples of that. The word replenish, for example. The best way to know what a word meant at the time that it was translated, because the King James Bible was translated in the year 1611, so it's over 400 years ago. So if you look at a dictionary from back at that time, you can know what a word meant then and what the translators meant when they used that particular word. But consider the word replenish. That's in Genesis 1:28, the Bible says, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, speaking to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. That word replenish, well, we know nowadays it means to refill, to restock what has been used up. But that's not what it meant back in 1611. Looking at the Oxford English Dictionary from that time, the word replenishment in ordinary transitive uses, it means to make full or to fill or to store abundantly with persons or animals, to fill up. So that's what that word meant. Otherwise, you could think, as some people mistakenly have, is that God is telling them that they have to refill the earth, that the earth had been full, and this is where a mistaken idea called the gap theory comes in, where people have believed that the earth had an entire population that got wiped out somehow before Adam ever came along. And they pointed to this verse as some kind of support for that. Well, that's what can happen if you misunderstand the meaning of a word. The word replenish today means to make full again, to refill. Consider the word gay. All right, there's a word that certainly has changed its meaning. In James chapter 2, verse 3, it says, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and saying to him, sit thou here in a good place, or say to the poor, stand thou there, or sit here under my footstool. Well, back at the time when the King James Bible was translated, the word gay in the Oxford English Dictionary meant of persons, referring to their attributes and actions to be full of or disposed to joy and mirth. And now, it wasn't all that long ago. I mean, in our lifetimes, that's what the word gay meant. All right. Then it got appropriated by, quote unquote, the gay community, by the word that they don't like, the Bible word, the sodomite community, the homosexual community. Because now, if you look up on dictionary.com the word gay, it says, all relating to or exhibiting sexual desire or behavior directed towards a person of the person's own sex, or homosexual. So it certainly has changed its meaning. I've got probably a couple dozen here, but I'm just going to use one more. The word let, L-E-T. 2 Thessalonians 2:7 says, "For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way." Well, nowadays we understand the word let to mean to give permission to allow something to happen. Well, it was exactly the opposite in 1611. The Oxford English Dictionary means let is to hinder, to prevent, to obstruct, to stand in the way of a person or a thing or an action. So it meant exactly the opposite. So if you don't understand that some words have changed in their meaning over time, it can result in confusion. And that's what has happened really with this subject of wine in the Bible. Because what was wine in the Bible times is not the wine that people make today. And we looked at the words, the common word for wine, the Greek New Testament word is oinos, O-I-N-O-S. In the Old Testament, it was called yayin, Y-A-Y-I-N. Same substance. They took the juice of grapes and they boiled it and boiled it and boiled it down until it was like a paste or a syrup, and they would store it that way. And then when they wanted to drink it, they would take some of it and they would mix it with water. Anywhere from 3 parts water to 1 part wine, up to 20 parts water to 1 part wine. And so most of the time, it didn't contain alcohol. But if it was left, it could ferment. But even then, the amount of alcohol would be really low. So even if it had the alcohol content of wine today, which is about 12%, when they mixed it with water, it would be down to a maximum of 3%, which in today's, by today's standards, doesn't even qualify as an alcoholic beverage. A substance has to be at least 3.2% alcohol to be even classified as an alcoholic beverage. And so we looked at that question of, was the wine of Bible times the same as wine today? And the answer is no. It clearly was not the same. It was not the same. So, the second question we considered, is it necessary? In other words, is it necessary to drink wine today? In biblical times, it was often necessary to drink wine as we described it, because in the unsanitary conditions of the old world, it could be dangerous actually to drink wine all by itself. So the reason, and this is something I discovered that was really, really interesting. The reason that God did not simply prohibit or condemn drinking what the Bible calls wine, meaning that syrup from grapes reconstituted or diluted with water, is because he created grapes and its byproducts as a powerful antibiotic, antiviral substance to protect people's health. Now, the interesting thing about that is modern science didn't discover that until this century. The earliest paper, when I discovered this and went searching back to find, well, when did scientists figure this out? The earliest paper I could find was 2004. Let me read you a portion of the summary of a scientific paper from the National Library of Medicine. This is a paper from 2014, and I removed the unpronounceable words, which might help a little bit. Here's what it said, the summary. Grapes produce organic compounds that may be involved in the defense of the plants against invading phytopathogens. These metabolites include numerous phenolic compounds that are also active against human pathogens. This overview surveys and interprets our present knowledge of the activities of wines and winery byproducts and some of their bioactive components against foodborne, medical, and oral pathogenic bacteria, viruses, fungi, which is the plural fungus, parasites, and microbial toxins. And that's with the difficult words removed, so you can imagine what it was like in the original. But what they have found is that just among the bacteria that grape byproducts can kill literally in minutes are E. coli and Listeria and Salmonella and all the staph viruses, Staphylococcus virus. Now, those are problems to this very day. We hear about people getting sick from E. coli and Salmonella and Staphylococcus. And being in prison, they were always on the lookout for possible staph infections because they could spread like wildfire and they were very difficult to treat. So modern man is still dealing with that to some extent. But you have to remember, back in Bible times, they didn't even know these things existed. These microscopic bacteria and viruses, they didn't know they existed. But of course God knew, and He had provided for mankind an antibiotic, antiviral substance to protect their health from completely unseen and unknown and undiagnosed problems from these vermin. And what's particularly of note is that it is not the alcohol of the wine that kills these vermin, because as we've said, much of the wine, quote unquote wine, didn't have any alcohol, or if it had any, it was a minuscule amount. So it's not the alcohol that kills all of these viruses and bacteria. It's actually a couple of acidic compounds in the wine, in the grapes and grape byproducts that kill these viruses and bacteria. So God, in His amazing grace, gave the ancient world a substance which would protect them from the harmful effects of unknown, unseen, undiscovered bacteria, viruses, toxins, and parasites that surrounded them. They were being protected and didn't even realize it. But folks, that was then, and this is now. We don't live in that world today. We know about viruses and bacteria and toxins and all that kind of stuff. So we ask ourselves, is drinking the wine of Bible times necessary for me, for this time, for this day and age? Well, consider what they had to drink back then. They had, of course, obviously wine, and that was the primary drink. They had probably also other fruit juices. They had milk, and they had water. And that was about it. They didn't have a whole lot of choices. Nowadays, the store shelves are crammed full of stuff to drink. Well, I've noticed that they're a little less full today. Isn't everything? But they've got all kinds of stuff. I mean, they even have this stuff called Yoo-hoo. I don't know if it's a soda trying to act like chocolate milk or it's chocolate milk trying to act like a soda. I'm not really sure. But, I mean, they got all kinds of stuff. And I remember years ago at Disney World and Epcot Center, they used to have a room there where you could go in and there was all these kiosks, dozens of them, and each one had, I don't know, 6, 8, 10, 12 soda fountains where you could taste all the different fountain sodas of the world. And there was probably, I don't know, over 100 of them in there. And they give you a cup and you just go around and taste all the different ones, and from all kinds of different countries. Some of them were pretty good, some of them were absolutely awful. I couldn't imagine how anybody was drinking that stuff. But so there was all kinds of substances for people to drink today. So drinking wine, is it necessary today? No, it's certainly not necessary. So if it's not a necessity, but people still do it, that makes it a preference. You can't say, I drink because they did it in the Bible. Well, it's not the same, and it's not necessary today. I've heard people say, well, I really think it is necessary, because if I don't do it, then people are going to be offended. I've got a lot of unsaved friends, and they drink, and I feel that I just need to have a beer with the boys, or need to drink some wine with the girls to be a part of the group, so I don't offend them. Well, that's kind of one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard. It really doesn't hold any water for a Christian at all. You know, if everybody in your block stops using deodorant, are you going to stop using it? I hope not. And what did our parents say to us? If so-and-so jumps off the bridge, are you going to do it? I bet you might have even said that to your own kids at some point. Yeah. So that's not really an argument at all. back in these times, there's probably as many non-Christians who don't drink as there are Christians who don't drink. You can find a whole bunch of them at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Find all these people there who've sworn off alcohol altogether. You probably meet people all the time who aren't Christians but don't drink. So you can't really make the argument of you've got to do it to be accepted. I've never had anybody denigrate my Christianity or think less of me because of choosing not to drink. But you can be sure there are plenty of people who would think less of your Christianity if they saw you drinking. Mm-hmm. So I will say this. If it's ever a genuine necessity, I mean, I'm talking about if you're lost in the desert, dying of thirst, and all you have is a bottle of Ripple, then it is a necessity. Now, frankly, I can't imagine what circumstances would lead to you being lost in the desert with only a bottle of Ripple, but if that happens, well, then you're clear, all right? But other than that, it's not a necessity. In our society, you've got to admit, it's a preference. It's a choice. So the third question we've got to ask, is it the best choice? If it's a choice, is it the best choice? Is it the choice you ought to make? Those who drink really have to admit it's not a necessity, it's a choice. Is it the best choice? Some might say, well, you know, it's a lot better for you than coffee. It's a lot better for you than Coca-Cola. Well, that's probably debatable. But I would say this. I never saw a guy drink 8 Cokes and then couldn't walk a straight line. Some people might say, well, you know what? It's just as dangerous or unhealthy as overeating. And again, that's probably debatable. But I would point out that no one ever killed someone on the highway because they ate one too many tacos. So the consequences are definitely different. So our study so far requires that we've got to not acknowledge that, one, drinking wine today is not the same as drinking wine in the Bible times, because wine is not the same as it was in the Bible times. And second, that it's not necessary to drink wine or alcohol today. It is a choice. And so the third question then has to be, is it the best choice? You know, there's lots of things that are a choice. For example, the Bible doesn't say you can't stick leaves in your mouth and light them on fire. You can't find a Bible verse that forbids that. Obviously, I'm talking about smoking, but you can't find a Bible verse that forbids smoking. Of course, though, you have to think about 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, which says, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. When I first got saved, I mean, like within a week, I had justified that it was still okay for me to smoke pot, because I read the verse in Genesis that said, God gave us every herb-bearing seed. And in my knowing almost nothing except the fact that I was saved, baby Christian mind said, okay, then that means that it's okay if I keep smoking pot, which I did for a while, I'm sorry to say. But then when I would come across verses like this, know ye not that ye are the temple of God, that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are? Well, I didn't like thinking about those verses. But that Holy Spirit just kept pounding away at my heart with verses like that until I quit those old bad habits. Modern science has proven beyond any reason without that smoking is dangerous and often deadly. But you can't find a Bible verse that directly addresses smoking. But we take principles from the Bible and apply them to the circumstances of life to make our decisions. At least that's what we're supposed to do. So you can say, well, smoking is a choice you make. Is it the best choice? If biblical liberty gives you the choice to drink wine, if you choose to, you still have to ask yourself, is that the best choice? So let's think about making choices for a few minutes. Because you should understand that the choices that you make in life determine your path in life. And most significantly, determines how closely you walk with God. So we're going to look at some biblical truths that relate to making choices that lead to the highest and the best relationship with God. All the way starting in the Old Testament, where God laid out the various offerings that the people of Israel had to bring to God. And the point that I'm going to be making here, that you'll see, is that there were higher standards for people with greater responsibility. And there's a lot of examples of that in the Bible. For example, think of the sin offering in the Old Testament. You remember that every Israelite was required to make a sin offering when they violated God's law. But if the sinner, in this case, the violator, was the high priest, the sacrifice that they had to make was a bull. If the sinner, the violator, was a king, a ruler, it had to be a male goat. But if it was the sin of just an ordinary person, a lay person, their sin offering could be 2 turtle doves, or young pigeons, or even flour. In other words, the higher your responsibility among God's people, the higher the requirement for a sacrifice. The high priest had to give the highest offering, a bullock. Under him, the rulers had to give a goat. And under them, the people could give doves or even flour, because the higher the rank, the more serious the responsibility, and the greater the damage inflicted on God's name when they openly sinned. That's why the Bible says in James chapter 3, verse 1, it says, "My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that ye shall receive the greater condemnation." And that's the reason that the Lord said, "To whom much is given," what? Much is required. Luke 12:48. So the higher the position, the greater the responsibility, and consequently the greater the damage to the cause of Christ when a Christian leader is found in sin. In other words, sin bears more guilt when a leader is found in sin, because its ramifications are far-reaching, aren't they? The Bible college I attended no longer exists. And I'm going to name names because the sin that led to the demise of my college was public. In 1982, I was in my second year of Bible college at Fellowship Baptist College in Peoria, Illinois, specifically East Peoria, Illinois. And the college was run and housed at Averyville Baptist College, which was the largest Baptist church in Illinois at the time, with attendance of around 2,000 people, and whose pastor at the time was a man by the name of Bobby Lounsbury. He was a well-known and very popular preacher. Halfway through my second year, Pastor Lounsbury brought in a co-pastor from Virginia by the name of Jack Gwynn. And he was brought in, so we were told, because Pastor Lounsbury had to travel so much representing the college, and that a co-pastor was needed. And it's true, Pastor Lounsbury did travel a lot for the school. So whenever he was in town, Pastor Lounsbury would preach, and when he wasn't, Pastor Gwynn would preach. Near the end of the of the school year, my second year there, something astonishing happened. One Sunday night, Pastor Lounsbury was in town, and he had preached that evening, and the service had just ended. I mean, we just had the final amen. The people were beginning to move out of their spots. The music had just started to play, and Pastor Lounsbury walked back up to the podium. He said, "Oh, everybody, I forgot one thing. One other thing I need to tell you. Since I'm traveling more and more, I'm resigning the church as of right now, and Pastor Gwynn is taking over as the sole pastor. I just wanted to let you know that." And with that, he turned and walked away off the platform, and we stood there stunned, dumbfounded, could not believe. We're looking at each other. Did he really just say that? Did he really just resign the church? The music began to play again, and we just didn't know what to do. We were flabbergasted. Less than 2 weeks later, one of the other students brought a local newspaper to our dorm and showed us a legal notice that showed that Bobby Lounsbury had filed for divorce from his wife. And within days, it was learned that the whole thing was planned ahead of time because Lounsbury had been having an affair with his secretary for at least a year and was planning on leaving his wife to marry his secretary. Folks, the church did nothing. No church discipline, no public acknowledgement of the pastor's sin, nothing. The church leadership was complicit in the way that Pastor Lounsbury was allowed to leave without rebuke, without taking any responsibility for his sin. And the consequences that Aberville Baptist Church for how they handled it were enormous. In the next year, adultery ran rampant through that church, with several more leaders having affairs, getting divorced, running off. The church quickly became a shell of its former self as God removed their candlestick, as he says he will do in Revelation 2:5 to an unrepentant church. The church went from around 2,000 people to about 200. The staff of more than a dozen full-time workers is now currently just the current pastor and his wife. They have never returned to anything close to their former ministry. I'm convinced it's because the church ignored the sin of their pastor. The higher the responsibility, the greater the damage to the cause of Christ when a leader sins. So God has standards for his people. But the standards for those in positions of leadership is even higher. In the Old Testament times, he called certain people above the standards that he set. He said, I'm going to set a higher standard for you. The first illustration of that will be found in Leviticus chapter 10, verses 8 to 11, where God is giving the requirements for the priesthood. It says, And God spake unto Aaron, saying, Do not drink wine, nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when thou go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, and that ye may put difference between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean, and that ye may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken unto them by the hand of Moses. That's a pretty strong standard. He told them, don't you have a drop of alcohol when you're ministering to me. Don't drink wine, even if it's not alcoholic, because of the standard, because of the position that you hold. As a priest of God, it was forbidden. It was forbidden. I'm not saying that they couldn't drink when they weren't ministering, but the statute was crystal clear. If you're ministering to me, not a drop of alcohol. He called them to a higher standard because leadership makes a difference. The devastation that comes about when leaders fail is much worse. And that's why we need to pray for our pastors regularly, because if the devil could have anybody that he chose to fall, number one choice is the pastor for any of the leaders of the church. He would choose them above anybody else in the congregation because the results, the devastation is worse. So there is definitely a higher standard for leadership than there is for everyone else. And we're out of time, so I'm going to stop for right now. We'll have a word of prayer, and we'll pick it up again next week.